Hello, my name is Lari Don and I'm delighted to be part of the Scottish Silly Squad Summer Reading Challenge this year. I've been invited by some very silly librarians to entertain you with stories for half an hour or so. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you a silly book with bottoms in the title. I am going to tell you a silly story. Well, actually the story itself isn't silly, but I'm going to look quite silly while I'm telling it, which is sort of the same thing. And I'm going to set you a silly task to do as well, which you can put up with the hashtag Scottish Silly Squad. So let's get started. Actually, when I was asked to do silly stories, I thought, but do I write silly stories? Because I quite often write serious or scary or exciting or adventurous stories with dragons and kelpies and monsters and magic, and that feels sometimes, when I'm putting my characters in danger and traps, that feels quite, well, it doesn't feel silly, it feels quite serious to me. Then I thought, well, sometimes I'm silly, sometimes I am silly, sometimes I write about bottoms. So I decided to read you this book, The Big Bottom Hunt, which was written by me but illustrated by the lovely Gabby Grant, a wonderful illustrator who isn't even slightly silly. So now I'm going to try and read you The Big Bottom Hunt and let you see all of the pictures as I read. On the day of the Big Bottom Hunt, Sandy and Ella went beachcombing. They took a bucket, a net, and a magnifying glass so you could see very tiny things. They walked along the shoreline, looking for treasures and toys washed up by the sea. Last week, they found a burst football, one welly, and a crab's pincer. The week before, they found an orange hard hat, 3 spiral shells, and a stripy stone. On the day of the Big Bottom Hunt, Sandy saw something glitter by the jaggy rocks, so they ran up to have a look. It was a telescope for seeing things very far away, but it wasn't stained by salt water or scraped by sand and stones. This is too clean and shiny to have been washed up by the sea. It must have been left by a person, said Sandy. We can't take it home. We'd better find its owner. How do we know who to give it to? Asked Ella. Let's look for clues, said Sandy, who wanted to be a detective when he grew up. And beside the telescope, they found some footprints, a whole ring of footprints, and they found an odd shape in the sand. There's the odd shape in the sand. Now the footprints were blurry and Sandy thought most of them were Ella's, but the odd shape was a bottom print, declared Sandy. Someone sat here looking out to sea with their telescope and they left their bottom print behind them in the sand. We just have to find the person whose bottom fits this shape, and we found the telescope's owner. Ella wasn't convinced. Do we have to get everyone in the village to sit in this wee hole? Asked Ella. No, because the sand will dry out soon and the bottom print will blow away. We have to preserve the evidence, said Sandy grandly. So they ran home for some big sheets of paper and their art box, and they traced the bottom print, and then the Big Bottom Hunt began. Is this your bottom? They asked Miss Forsyth. My bottom? How dare you inquire about my bottom? You children may have bottoms, but I am a Forsyth, and we have never had bottoms. We have posteriors, or sit-upons, or rear ends. She slammed the door. Oh, sorry, Miss Forsyth, they sang, and they ran off giggling. Is this your bottom? They asked Angus. Bottom! He shouted in delight as they put the paper down on the ground and showed him how to sit on it. When he stopped wriggling and giggling, they could see lots of bottom print round the edge of his shorts. Oh, you're too wee, Angus. It's not your bottom. Is this your bottom? They asked Captain Christie. I don't think so, he said. Why do you ask? They showed him the telescope. Oh, a spyglass, he exclaimed. A very fine one, too. I had a spyglass when I sailed the sea. I used it to find treasure islands and enemy ships. Oh, if my bottom fitted, would I get the spyglass as a prize? They put the bottom print on his captain's chair and he sat down. The whole sheet of paper disappeared under his trousers. Sorry, Captain Christie, it's not your bottom. His bottom was maybe a little bit too big, but they didn't say that. We're looking for a bottom that's bigger than Angus's bottom, but smaller than Captain Christie's bottom, said Ella. So they asked everyone they knew, is this your bottom? But it wasn't anybody's bottom. It couldn't be Baby Ben, because his nappy made one big splodge in the sand. It couldn't be Mr. Balfour, because the folds of his kilt would make his bottom print stripy. And it certainly couldn't be Sandy and Ella's mum, because she never got a chance to sit down. So by tea time, they had asked everyone in the village about their bottom. Well, everyone except the summer visitors in the holiday home at the end of the barn. We can't ask complete strangers about their bottoms, said Ella. Why not? Argued Sandy. They can't be any more offended than Miss Forsyth. Ella had an idea. Maybe we could use the spyglass to see if any of them have the right size of bottom. So, through the spyglass, they saw a mum, a dad, a wee boy and a big girl, and they all had ordinary sized bottoms. So, Sandy and Ella took a couple of deep breaths, marched up to the door and knocked. The wee boy answered. Is this your bottom? They asked. No, he said, I still have mine. He waggled his bottom at them and closed the door. They knocked again. And this time, the mum answered. Excuse us, but is this your bottom? Why do you want to know? Well, we found a telescope on the beach beside this bottom print. If we can find the person whose bottom fits, we can give them back their telescope. Ah, said the mum, and called Charmaine. And the big girl, who wasn't really so big, just a wee bit bigger than Sandy, came to the door. Is this your bottom? They asked together. Charmaine laughed. It could be. And she sat down on the bottom print. It fits! They all shouted. Is this your telescope? That's my grandpa's old spyglass, Charmaine said happily. Thank you for finding it. How did you know it was mine? So Sandy and Ella told her about the clues on the beach, their day of detective work, and all the bottoms they had seen. And there are all the bottoms they had seen. Illustrated by Gabby Grant, who isn't even slightly silly, but has just filled 2 pages with bottoms. And the children met at the beach early the next morning. They looked out to sea with the spyglass. They made footprints, toe prints, hand prints, fingerprints, bottom prints, head prints, brother prints, sister prints, a whole beach full of prints. And they played happily ever after, or at least until the end of the summer holidays. And that is the rear end. And that is the end of the Big Bottom Hunt. I thought I would tell you how I had the idea for that book. Because stories don't just appear. Well, they do sometimes just appear, but they usually appear because of what's going on around you. And one day I was at the beach with my 2 daughters, and we were experimenting with the best way to make bottom prints. And the important thing about making any kind of prints on a beach is the sand. If the sand is too wet, firstly, you get wet trousers and wet pants and a wet bottom. You But also if the sand is too wet, it doesn't hold the shape of the print. But if you go way up the top of the beach and you get to where it's really, really dry, the sand is so dry that it doesn't hold the print at all. It isn't solid enough. It's nice to sit on, but it's not going to hold a print. So there's the perfect stripe of a beach, a wee bit away from the water so it's not so wet, and a wee bit away from the top so it's not too dry. And that's the perfect place for bottom prints. So we were experimenting, finding the right place to make bottom prints. And once we found it, my daughters made lines and lines and lines of bottom prints. They had so much patience for it, and I didn't. I made about 3 bottom prints and then just felt like sitting beside my own bottom print and gazing out to sea. And as I gazed out to sea, the story bit of my brain thought, ooh, what if? What if you found just one bottom print? Not the lines and lines of them that we'd be making, but one individual bottom print. And what if it was a clue? What if the bottom print gave you a clue for someone you had to find or something you had to find? And I sat there on the beach while my girls were playing, thinking about what a bottom print could be a clue for. And that is where the story of the Big Bottom Hunt came from, about using a bottom print as a clue. Though I have to admit it was also a wee bitty inspired by a fairy tale as well. And I don't tell people that very often, but I bet you could guess which fairy tale if you thought a little bit about the names in the book. Some of the names in the book will give you a clue about what fairy tale also inspired me. So that is the Big Bottom Hunt. Probably one of the sillier books that I have written. And I love writing books, but I don't just love writing books, I also love telling stories. The old stories that people used to tell before we had books or TV or libraries or radio or cinema, when people just used to pass on stories. They weren't even always written down. And I love those old stories. And I thought I would tell you one of my favourites today. And this is a story that actually, it connects to the Big Bottom Hunt, because people make, if we sit down, if we're not wearing a kilt, we make bottom prints that shape. But if an animal sat down, its bottom print would be a different shape, because it would be a bottom and tail print. And that made me think about stories to do with tails. So this is my favourite story to do with tails. And I'm going to stand up to tell it, because I need to move around. If I'm going to be really silly, I need space to wag on my bottom. So here we go. So this is a story, I've heard this story described as coming from a variety of different countries, North America, USA, Canada, Scandinavia. It's definitely from somewhere far north, and you'll find out why as I tell it. Because this is a story about an animal with a marvellous tail. There are lots of animals and birds with wonderful tails. You think of the peacock's beautiful green and blue tail, or the tiger's lovely stripy tail. But a long, long time ago, when the world was new and animals were still working out who they were, the animal who had the fanciest tail in the forest was the bear. The big brown bear had a beautiful, long, brown tail. It was gorgeous, not just the length of it, but the texture of the fur. It was soft, it was silky, it was fluffy, and it was a beautiful, rich, chocolatey brown. So everyone agreed that the bear had the most beautiful tail in the forest, and she knew it. And she used to go around going, look at my tail, look at my tail, look at my lovely fluffy tail. And all the other animals would go, oh, look at her tail, her lovely fluffy tail, isn't it fab? Well, it was fab, but it wasn't awfully convenient. The bear loved honey, but her tail made it hard for her to climb up to get to bees' hives of their honey. She loved berries, but this great big long tail made it hard to get in amongst bushes and pick berries. But even though it was inconvenient, she was so proud of her tail. Look at my tail, look at my tail, look at my lovely fluffy tail. And everyone enjoyed her lovely fluffy tail. At parties, at birthdays, at feasts, the baby animals used to decorate her tail. They used to hang bells and glitter and flowers and ribbons and make her tail into the most beautiful thing. And then she would go, look at my tail, look at my tail, look at my lovely, fluffy, glittery, jingly tail. And everyone agreed that this was the fanciest tail in the forest. Everyone except one animal. One animal wasn't impressed at everyone always agreeing that this was a fabulous fluffy tail, because this animal, the fox, he had a wonderful tail too, or he thought he did. He had a big bushy tail. It was a reddish brown with a white tip and a beautiful shape. And it was a gorgeous tail, and the fox wanted people to pay attention to his tail. Look at my tail, he would go, look at my tail, look at my lovely bushy tail. But everyone was going, look at her fluffy tail, look at the bear's tail, isn't the bear's tail just the best tail? And the fox felt jealous, sad, upset, a little bit angry. And so the fox came up with a plan. One winter's day, the fox went down to the banks of the icy river and found the otter. Now, the river was covered over with ice, but the otter occasionally swam under the river to get fish, so the otter had some fish in store, and the fox bought those fish and walked through the forest with a basket of 10 fish on his back going, I'm going to have fish and chips for tea. Look at all these fish. I caught these fish myself, you know. Fish and chips and salt and vinegar for tea. It's going to be lovely. And all the other animals went, ooh, fish and chips, salt and vinegar, sounds nice. You caught those yourself? That's quite impressive. And he kept walking through the forest telling everyone he could find he caught these fish himself. He was going to eat them for his tea. But he wasn't really bothered about impressing all the other animals. He was listening as he walked for the faint sounds of, look at my tail, look at my tail, look at my lovely fluffy tail. And when he followed those sounds, he found the bear showing off about her lovely fluffy tail. So the fox walked loudly past everybody going, look at all these fish. I've got lots of lovely fish, caught them myself, you know, planning to have fish and chips, salt and vinegar for my tea. And the bear went, ooh, fish for tea? You caught them yourself in the winter. How did you do that? And the fox went, oh, it's a secret. It's a secret, and it only works for animals with really splendid tails. So I can't really share it with anybody else. And the bear went, oh, but I've got a splendid tail. Look at my tail. Look at my tail. And the fox went, yes, we've all heard it. We've all heard it. But if you think you've got a splendid tail and you think you can make my secret way work, come here and I'll tell you. And the bear said, oh yes, I would love to know how to catch fish using my splendid tail. So the fox said, come on down, come to the river and I'll show you. And the fox took the bear down to the frozen river. And the fox and the bear went out onto the ice, and the fox said, what you do is you cut a hole in the ice, and then you sit down beside the hole and you drape your tail into the water. So you're sitting on the edge of the hole with your tail in the water, and the bear did that and sat down. And the bear was sitting on the ice with her tail in the water, and the fox said, now all you have to do is stay there and be really, really patient, because the fish will be fascinated by your beautiful tail. They will come and they will play in the hairs and fur of your tail, and they'll get caught. Your tail will act like a net. So if you sit here for a long time, being really patient, eventually, when you stand up, you'll have lots of fish caught in your tail. And then you can have fish and chips for your tea, which is what I'm off to do. And off went the fox with the fish, leaving the bear on the ice. And the bear sat there on the ice with her tail down the hole. Now, it was cold on the ice, it was cold on her bottom. She got a bit of a numb bum sitting on the edge of the ice, but it was going to be worth it if she got all these fish. So she sat there with her tail. She could feel the water under the ice pushing past her tail, currents and eddies, and she could feel bigger things pushing against her tail. Was that the fish? Oh, were they going to get caught in the fur of her tail? Was she going to have fish and chips for tea? And she sat there for a long, long time, waiting for enough fish to be caught in her tail. And it was cold and her bum was numb, and eventually she thought, I might not have 10, but I've probably got some. I'll stand up and see how many I've got. So she stood, oh no, wait a minute. And she couldn't get up. She couldn't get up, so she looked behind her. Now, it's not easy to see your own tail when you're sitting down. And she couldn't really see what was going on, but she was fairly sure that what happened was the hole in the ice had got smaller, the water had frozen over again, and the ice had frozen and trapped her tail. And her tail was held by this. She was going to have to put a bit of effort into getting free. So she put all her paws on the ice, and she pushed, and pop! Up she stood, and she was free. The bear wasn't trapped in the ice, but, oh wait a minute. Her tail was still trapped in the ice. All she had left was a stump. Her tail, her beautiful fluffy tail, was still trapped in the ice. Now, It wasn't sore because her bum was numb from all that ice, but she'd lost her beautiful tail. Now, to be fair, this did make it easier for the bear to climb trees to get honey and go through bushes to get berries, but even though it was easier, she missed her tail. And so at parties when no one was decorating her tail, you could hear her say, "Where is my tail? Where is my tail? Where is my lovely fluffy tail?" But you could also hear, even louder, the fox saying, "Look at my tail, look at my tail, look at my lovely bushy tail," as all the baby animals decorated the fox's tail instead. And everyone agreed that the fox had the fanciest tail in the forest. Everyone except one animal up in the trees, the squirrel, who had a long, curved, elegant, beautiful, fluffy tail and wished more people would pay attention to her tail. So the squirrel was up in the tree, coming up with a plan. And that is the story of how the bear lost her tail. And one of the things I love about old stories is sharing them, but I also love thinking of new stories connected to them. I never tell a story and just leave it at that. It always makes me think, oh, I wonder what would happen next, like with the squirrel, for example. Or I wonder what would happen if. Or I take a little bit of the story that interests me and do something else with it. That's how I write most of my novels, actually, is being inspired by old stories. And I thought you could do that too. You could maybe do something with that story about the bear and her tail. So here's a silly challenge for you, which if you want to share, you can use the Scottish Silly Squad hashtag. But what you could do is you could design your own fancy tail. You could draw a tail, whether it's a long fluffy tail like the bear's, or a curved bushy tail like the fox's, or even a squirrel's tail. Any kind of fancy tail, any shape of tail, and decorate it. Decorate it with drawings, with sparkles, with glitter, with stickers. You can dangle fish in it if you really want. Decorate this tail any way you fancy until you have made the fanciest tail in the forest. And if you want to leave it just as a fancy tail, that's great. But I would always then think of a story too. I would think, well, who doesn't have a tail? I mean, we don't. People don't have tails. Or there are creatures that just have little stumpy tails that you couldn't decorate, like hamsters and bears. So I wonder if you could look at that tail and think what animal or person might want that tail, might want a beautiful decorated tail. What might they do to get that tail? You could write a story about that, or a different story. What if someone woke up, an animal or a person, one morning and had a tail, fancy tail, decorated tail? Would it be a surprise? Would it be a shock? Would they be horrified? Would they be delighted? What would happen next? And what would happen next is what fascinates me about stories. That's what I love about making up stories. So there's your silly task. Draw a tail and decorate it, and show us that if you want online with the hashtag Scottish Silly Squad. And if you want to, make up a story about someone who wants that tail, or someone who wakes up surprised to discover that they have a tail. And you can tell us all your silly stories online using the hashtag. I'm just going to check. The hashtag is Scottish Silly Squad. And any silly stories you want to tell us about tails or bottoms would be fantastic. So, that's me. I've read you a book about bottoms, I've waggled my bottom while telling you a story about tails, and I've set you a task, a silly task. And now I'm going to leave you with the information that you can still join up for the Summer Reading Challenge. If you haven't done it already, you can sign up for the Summer Reading Challenge. The information will come up on screen when I finally stop talking. And also, even though your local library isn't open right now, your librarians are still working. So if you want to contact them, your local librarians, they can help you with the Summer Reading Challenge, they can help you find books, they can help you find stories. And I hope you all have a wonderful and slightly silly story-filled summer.